Good evening to all. I'm very excited to present the draft regional housing plan to you tonight. Members of the RPC were, as Frank mentioned, provided a copy of the plan very recently, and following tonight's presentation, the draft will be posted on the RiverCOG website, where we've provided a forum for public comment. Before I begin the presentation, I'd just like to say that we're very proud of this effort and proud of our region for coming together voluntarily to consider and address housing issues in a collaborative way. That said, this plan is worth nothing and it will accomplish nothing without the support of the municipalities. So it's our hope that after this presentation, you circulate this plan far and wide, and we will do the same so that we can make sure it's the best that it can be and so that we can move some of these ideas forward. This regional housing plan is one of the first of its kind in the state. As you're no doubt aware, there's no requirement for housing to be addressed at the regional level. There is a mandate for towns to address affordable housing, but it's fairly vague. As most of you are familiar, CGS Section 830J states that at least once every 5 years, each municipality shall prepare or amend and adopt an affordable housing plan for the municipality. Such plan shall specify how the municipality intends to increase the number of affordable housing developments in the municipality. And that's pretty much what we were given to work with, which in this case ended up being a positive because it provided us with some flexibility in our approach. So the RiverCOG municipalities agreed voluntarily to take a look at affordable housing and housing in general in a coordinated way. This was a natural next step following the adoption of the Regional Plan of Conservation and Development last September, which included several goals and recommendations that would impact and be impacted by housing. In addition, as Sam mentioned, 12 of the region's municipalities decided to create their state-required 830J plans as part of this process. Given this interest, we set up the plan in two parts. The first, which we initially called the Regional Housing Analysis, is now the Regional Housing Plan, which we're presenting tonight. It takes a bird's eye view of the entire region and uses a three-part methodology for assessing and addressing housing needs. The regional plan is intended to further the visions and goals set out in the RPOCD. The second part of the plan is what we've called the 830J annexes. These annexes are the 830J plans for those 12 participating municipalities. They stand alone and they were adopted independently by the participating municipalities, but they were informed by the regional analysis, and they in turn informed the regional recommendations that round out the regional plan. We will not be going over these annexes tonight, except to the extent that they informed the regional recommendations. Before we get into the text, here's a little background on where we've been. We initiated this project last summer. Our public launch for the project was held via Zoom in October 2021. We, along with our consultant team, SLR, Tyche Planning, and Goman & York, focused on collecting and analyzing regional and town data through spring 2022. We shared our major findings and methodology at the second regional presentation, also virtual, in January 2022. We conducted municipal 830J workshops in the participating towns through February and March. We finalized the 830J plans and completed the regional recommendations in June, and that brings us to date. So now I'm going to go over a bit of the Regional Housing Plan document. The Regional Housing Plan aims to achieve or move the region toward 6 objectives in furtherance of the vision in the RPOCD. These are: diversify the region's population in terms of age, race, and socioeconomic status, create a resilient workforce in the region, ensure that people who work in the region can live in close proximity to their jobs, diversify housing stock for non-traditional households, examine ways to make the existing housing stock, office, and retail space in the region function for a changing population, and encourage the orderly creation of housing of different styles and types throughout the region near existing areas of development, employment, and transit. With these overarching objectives in mind, the Regional Housing Plan utilizes a three-part methodology for assessing housing needs and creating a framework to address them. A baseline analysis, which considers the region's demographics, economic conditions, and current housing stock in order to identify gaps between those living and working in the region and the type of housing that's readily available to them. Then a suitability analysis considers the environmental assets and constraints of the region, as well as zoning regulations, available infrastructure, and transportation access in order to identify areas in the region that are more suitable for housing development. And finally, the methodology incorporated the vision and goals in the RPOCD in order to identify targeted methods of housing growth in furtherance of that plan. The baseline assessment found that there was a mismatch between the region's population, its housing supply, and its jobs, all three of which have been in a stagnant to declining trend over the last several years. The region's supply of larger, older, more expensive houses on large lots are not well suited to an aging demographic or shrinking household size, nor are they likely to attract or retain a younger population, and they're not attainable to much of the population currently working in the region. The baseline assessment concludes that the region should increase its supply of smaller, modern, and more affordable units in order to provide housing opportunities for each of these groups. The suitability analysis found that although there are large areas of the region that are zoned single-family residential and particularly low-density single-family residential, many of those areas are not necessarily appropriate for encouraging more housing. Much of that land contains important environmental resources, lacks infrastructure like sewer and water, or has limited access to alternative modes of transportation. The suitability analysis concluded that when we're focusing on growing our housing supply, these areas should be excluded in order to focus on the appropriate, i.e., more sustainable areas to direct housing growth. And finally, the RPOCD was incorporated into the analysis using that plan's sustainable, innovative, connected, and community themes. These themes are each tied to housing in the RPOCD, and this regional housing plan is intended to build on that framework. The sustainable theme charges us with growing in a balanced way, improving diversity while preserving existing natural resources. This means, and the recommendations from the RPOCD state, that we should focus new and varied housing development into targeted higher density centers. Of course, this development should be context sensitive and scaled appropriately to the surrounding community. And additional encroachment into existing open space or greenfield sites should be avoided to the extent possible. The connected theme directs us to provide housing in such a way to encourage ease of access to jobs, services, and amenities by all modes of travel and for all types of people. Multimodal transportation is central to the issue of equity. In areas where vehicle ownership may be low, providing transit options allow those without cars or those who don't drive the ability to live in the region. In addition, increasing gas and car prices disparately impact lower income individuals, making proximity to reliable alternative modes of transportation critical. Increasing housing opportunities with access to a broad range of transportation alternatives will be important to attracting a wider diversity of residents. The innovative theme suggests that this housing plan might function as an economic driver for attracting new residents and businesses, as well as supporting workers for existing local businesses. In order to support the region's essential workers, it will be important to create a diverse range of housing options to provide the region's workers an opportunity to live near their jobs. Further, in stimulating the economy, the region must simultaneously plan for and provide new housing opportunities. A portion of these should be attractive to young professionals, which will also support and attract employers. And finally, the community theme of the RPOCD is probably the most closely tied to housing. Its vision directs us to provide housing that is attractive to a diversity of residents, including new residents, and provide existing residents with potential new options. In order to achieve this vision and create more diverse and vibrant communities, our region will need to create a range of housing options in and around community centers that are supported by multimodal transportation options, attractive to younger residents, supportive of senior populations, affordable to a variety of income levels, and suitable for varying household sizes and types. After establishing the types of housing needed in the region and the targeted areas, the Regional Housing Plan also considers housing market capacity. This is because we will be largely dependent on the private sector to build housing. Therefore, it's important to understand what the market will support. This section considers the housing market demand drivers, jobs, population, household formation, and income to determine that the current housing market in the region is weak. This is exacerbated by soaring prices of materials and shortage of labor. Under the current trajectory and based on historic periods of low growth and weak demand drivers, it's predicted that the region can only support an estimated 200 units per year. If we work to implement the RiverCOG vision, growing our economy and improving our population projections, we may enter into a growth trajectory which would support 600 units per year. Because of the need for more affordable and diverse housing is real in the region, and because creating a better housing supply is part of implementing the RiverCOG, it's important that we are strategic in the creation of new housing units while the demand is weak. Now, it was after taking the regional analysis to this point in our process that we paused to focus on the creation of the municipal 830J plans. These plans were created for Cromwell, Portland, Middletown, East Hampton, East Haddam, Killingworth, Chester, Deep River, Essex, Clinton, Lyme, and Old Lyme. You will not find these plans in the document we're circulating for review, but they will ultimately be attached to the final document as an appendix. If you're interested, you can find these plans on the websites for each of these towns at this point. Throughout the drafting of these plans, the idea of coordinating efforts and sharing resources came up often. Each municipality was interested in what other municipalities were doing, and once the plans were finalized, we looked through the recommendations to identify areas of consensus and overlap. Plans for municipalities that didn't participate in the regional process were also reviewed and incorporated into the analysis. This table, which you will find included in the plan, shows areas of alignment among the region's municipalities as determined based on the goals and recommendations in their 830J plans. The Regional Housing Plan emphasizes that ongoing coordination and cooperation is essential if the region intends to grow its supply of housing sustainably. Areas of alignment among the municipalities are an easy place to begin this coordination effort and set up a framework for moving forward. Based on the areas of alignment, along with the findings and analysis, 3 overarching recommendations were created to facilitate the implementation of this plan. The first recommendation is to create a housing toolkit. Many of the overlapping goals of the municipalities require regulatory and policy changes. RiverCOG will create a housing toolkit that will support this process. The toolkit, which would be web-based, would include background information, best practices research, and sample language for regulatory and policy changes. And this information would be made readily available for every municipality to use if they so choose. The second recommendation is to study transit-oriented development. Housing opportunity near transit stations is key to equitable and sustainable growth. Locating new housing with a mixture of office and retail near transit can lower the impact of development on land resources, make transit a more viable alternative to cars, and create more vibrant and accessible places to live and work across the region. RiverCOG, in coordination with the towns with Shoreline East stations, will conduct a transit-oriented development study to analyze the capacity of the land to accommodate walkable, bikeable, mixed-use development, and also consider alternative solutions for using those transit stations to improve access and connectivity. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, this plan proposes that the region establish a regional housing commission. Establishing a housing commission that operates on the regional level is the easiest way to ensure regional coordination on housing issues. This should be created as a voluntary association of the region's municipalities with representation from each community. It could be hosted by RiverCOG, which would provide staffing and support. Once established, it's envisioned that the role of this commission would grow over time in 3 suggested phases. Phase 1 would focus on education, outreach, and partnership. Regional Housing Commission would serve as the go-to information resource on housing and community development. Providing education on housing programs and resources, as well as utilizing a dedicated housing point person, were high on the list of overlapping municipal recommendations. This approach would allow the region's municipalities to utilize economies of scale and share the same information source. The Commission could also serve as the primary point of contact for partnering and coordinating efforts with nonprofits like Hope Partnership and Habitat for Humanity across the region, as well as acting as the coordinator for developers looking to create housing in the region. The idea here is that developers, nonprofits, and members of the public would not have to scour multiple websites or town halls across the region in order to create or obtain housing here. The Commission would be informed on what each of the municipalities has, wants, or needs, and will be able to connect interested parties with one another. Phase 2 for the Commission would involve data collection and analysis. It's recommended that the Commission be tasked with developing a methodology and creating a regional housing needs assessment every 5 years that would support the creation of municipal affordable housing plan updates. The methodology should consider factors like population growth, job markets, access to transportation, access to infrastructure, and environmental assets and constraints to project housing needs, and should provide a framework for municipalities to coordinate those needs in a sustainable way. And finally, phase 3 for the Commission would involve expanding operations. Once the Commission is established, the member municipalities may choose to give the Commission additional authority. It could function or partner with a regional land bank, create and administer a regional housing trust fund. It could operate as or with a regional housing land trust, and or could act as or partner with regional or municipal housing authorities. There are pros and cons to each of these options, which are preliminarily sketched out in the plan. However, which, if any of these options are ultimately pursued, would be a future decision of the Commission based on further deliberation. And just to wrap things up, I'd like to note that we do acknowledge there's plenty of work to be done to improve our housing situation in the region. And it's been our hope with this plan to create a foundation and a framework for that future work to be built on in a coordinated and sustainable way.